let's kind of do the wheat and the tares parable 101. Just step back and take a look at who is what and why in this little story Jesus tells, and then move on from there. The man who's sowing the good seed, of course, is Christ. Jesus sowing the good seed. The enemy then is someone sowing a bad seed, or the bad seed is the one who is the enemy, who is Satan doing this. Then we come down to, well, then what really is the seed? And I said, what is the good seed? And if you look at it and you get philosophical and you look at how Jesus explains further on in the passage that we didn't look at that part, you're free to look at that later. It really comes down to this. The good seed is the presence and the nature of God being put into in the individual heart, or being put into the heart. The bad seed then, of course, becomes the opposite. The bad seed is anything that is not God being put in the heart. Those things where a good seed, wheat is a life-giving grain. You make bread, you eat it, it nourishes you. So the bad seed then is that which kills, that which does not really bring life. And it was asked, and I love it because, being honest, somebody in the first service said, what exactly is tares anyway? And I said, good question. Let's take a look at what tares is in all of this as we separate out. Tares is a weed. The thing about it is that it is a weed that, especially in the early stages, looks so much like wheat, it's indistinguishable. The Hebrews actually had a word for it. It was called bastard wheat, or because it was this distorted hybrid, or however you want to look at it. It was something that looked like wheat but really wasn't wheat. It came from the same genus. It was a bad thing. So there you are with this wheat, or this weed that looks like the real thing but isn't. So there's our first thing we know about it. Second thing about this, it does something weeds tend to do anyway. The tares, this weed that looks like wheat, when it starts to grow, by the time you get to tell the difference, it's too late. It's already entangled its roots all in through the roots of the wheat. So if you try and pull up the tares, you're going to tear up the wheat as well. So that makes perfect sense. And to the Hebrew people who were first listening to this story, all this made perfect sense. You wouldn't dare pull it up because you would lose the wheat. That's what would happen. So you had to wait until it all grew, and then you sifted out the difference at that time. Growing in among the roots, the good roots and the bad roots together. Now, a lot of times if we hear a parable on the wheat and the tares, the way it's presented is that it's a weed, it's this useless thing that grows up among a good thing. But you know what? Tares are actually worse than that. Tares, for one thing, they're bitter, so if they contaminated your wheat flour, it would make the flour itself bitter. And even worse than that, the kernels from the tares is poison. It would, if you ingested any amount of this, it causes dizziness and hallucinations. It causes a kind of a psychotropic reaction in people. It's a poison. And it twists the mind, may even become deadly. So there's some really bad things about these tares coming up in your wheat, and contaminating your food. And the final thing is, what Jesus is saying isn't just a story that came up. It was an actual event. This actually happened. Even to this day in the Middle East, this can happen. It's a threat of many people being farmers. If someone has malice against you, this was one thing they would do, because it was such a perfect biological war weapon to use. You go in the middle of the night and you deliberately sow tares in these weeds among the good seed the farmer has in his field. He'll never know. It starts to sprout. He'll never know. Until it starts getting bigger, and then he goes, oh no, an enemy has done this. I know I had good seed. Somebody contaminated my field. So it's a serious predicament, and it's a malicious thing. So this is the world in which we live. This is a description by Jesus himself of the world in which we live. Great. How does it tie in with missions? What can we draw from that context into this whole field thing? Well, let's think about this a little bit in what each thing meant and all of that. First, the field. The field, as far as in a straightforward interpretation of what Jesus says, the field is the human race. It is the human heart. It is the heart of things. Now, this is where it applies at a whole lot of levels, because the field can be the heart of a nation. It can be the heart of the culture. It can be the heart of the family. It can be the heart of the community. It can be the heart of the single individual. Bottom line is, it is that growing place where your nature will be set. It's that place of which the soil, the core of the soul from which things grow. That's one thing to know. We're talking about the deep inside, whether it's collectively or the individual. That's the field. Secondly, then, is this insight. The field is defined by its content. The nature of the field is defined by its content. Farmers go out. They turn over the soil and everything. If you just imagine doing a really good job. A field in itself is lifeless. There's nothing, there's the potential for life, but it in itself is lifeless. It is defined by the seeds that go into it. When the farmers go out in the spring and they plant, and if they put in corn seed, it becomes a corn field. If they were to plant soybean, it becomes a soya field. If for some reason they decided to plant a bunch of weeds, it would become a weed field. It is defined by the seed that is allowed to grow in it. Well, that's great. How does that apply here? Is knowing what the enemy is or what the friend is. See, the field is not the enemy. The field is just the growing place. The enemy or the friend is what is sown into there. The seed is the friend or the enemy. It's an important distinction. That's something these folks we saw on the video understood. They're in a place so dangerous that their faces aren't shown, but they're over there to reach people, because the people aren't the enemy, they're the field. They're working in seeds. It's what seeds gets planted in them, a good seed or a bad seed, that we end up with the beginning, with the ISIS portion of that video or the missionary portion of that video. In parts of the world, there are seeds that are so poisonous that we see groups like this spawn that we looked at as ISIS or the Boko Haram or some of these other groups that are out there, fueling the darkest part of the human nature, doing things that are completely horrible, just brutal, and it's very much like the tares. You know, the thing about somebody who's under the influence of some kind of a psychotic drug of some sort, no matter what they're doing, it makes perfect sense to them. Their mind is bent in such a way, the synapses are firing in such a way that whatever they think that's reality. They're firmly convinced, no matter how insane, that is reality. That's what the bending of the mind can do. We looked at, and not that we're picking on Islam as a whole, but this extreme militant, it's probably not even fair to call it Islam, because it's kind of this offshoot excuse, really, for violence. But as you look at it, those people are firmly convinced in what they're doing. Bad seed gets sown in people. It gets sown, and bad things happen if it's allowed to germinate freely. Given time, just like those tares, entangling themselves even in the good stuff. Then we can take a look back at ourselves a little bit. If we look at our own nation, the whole phenomena of political correctness, we have things that are entangled, that are not good things, so entangled with what are good things that are pseudo-morals, entangled with real morals, that you can't pull them apart anymore. You're uprooting the good with the bad. Now, in the first, I was telling Brenda Anderson had called me earlier in the week and was talking about the school a little bit because she was very concerned with something. As you may know, Brenda's head of FCA, the Christian Association, the group that meets on campus. Well, the idea with the school is political correctness, a good idea, everything open. Well, they ran into trouble with something that was I'm just going to say a not so good group that had been meeting, and they ran into trouble with parents and everything, and so there was trouble with that group. A teacher deciding then to sue the school because they're not doing equal rights, and of course the Civil Liberties Union and all of that gets involved in all of this. And so what happens is things like FCA are now in jeopardy because of this other thing. The roots get so entangled that you end up pulling up the good with the bad. So it is a real concern, all with how seeds get planted in the field of people's hearts and minds, anywhere, here or abroad. Third truth in all of this is as we look at the situation, already we had one response. Things had gotten so bad in the Middle East that we respond with military force. What are you going to do? There's guns pointed your way, you point them back type of thing. But you know what? The military response to something, even if it's needed, it's more like a lawnmower. You get bad seed in your lawn, you go out and you just mow everything down, and you took care of the problem, at least to the immediate response. However, the bad roots are still there. You cannot get rid of them with that tool. That tool has its place, but you cannot have the real cure with that kind of a response in that way. What you can do with the military is a military can stop hearts, but it can't change them. That's not going to happen. How do things change? Well, if we look at the situation as Christ has said, if the human heart is a field, if the human community is a field, and what grows in it all depends on the seed planted in it, then there's only one way to truly handle a problem, is to plant the right seed, to put in the right seed. Nature doesn't like a vacuum. Something's going to get planted. If you don't plant it, nature has weeds that it'll be very happy to put in there in your place. But that's the thing, is the only answer is the right seed. The good seed is the presence of God. The good seed is the wisdom, insight, truth of God. All of these things, it is a powerful, powerful thing. No weed can overpower the good seed. However, to plant and see the good seed root takes patience, and it takes effort, and sometimes it even takes blood. We've learned that from the cross in all of this. So it is in the planting of the good seed, the planting of the seed, where the war is won. You and I are called to a quiet war. There's not a noise in planting seeds. There's no boom of a gun. There's no shout of a threat. It's just the quiet planting of the good seed and nourishing. You might have caught that even as we watched the initial video up there. Did you notice how in the first part there was a lot of screaming and yelling and military vehicles and all kinds of stuff? But as we looked at what the missionaries were doing, it was just quiet explanation of what has to be done. We're in the quiet war, the quiet business, but powerful business of planting seeds wherever God allows. Weeds spread. The same thing is true in the spiritual dynamic, in the global picture. The field of humanity is becoming smaller all the time. Technology has done that. You can fly from here halfway around the world and be there in just a day or two. And even more ideas travel at the speed of the internet. You come up with an idea today and you can let somebody know in Afghanistan 3 seconds later. It's a small field. So it's not even the size of Texas in the analogy anymore. It's your own backyard. Things spread quickly. You know the whole painful lesson of 9/11? Weeds spread quickly. It happens. It ends up in our own backyard really quick. Doesn't matter if you ignore it. They're going to keep growing. That's the thing that goes on with this type of thing. What is being sown in the heart, in the minds of people half a world away, people that are not our enemy. The field is not the enemy, the seed is. What is being sown in the mind of people half a world away, we will reap here at some point. The fruit, be it good or bad. Be it good or bad, we will all reap from that fruit. The only possible strategy, the only thing that will truly save the soul of the world is to plant the good seed. The good seed in its full essence is Christ himself. You are the only people who have the good seed. You are Christians. Christians. Who else has that seed? Then who else can sow it? I don't say that in order to puff us up. I say it from a point of responsibility. If you are lucky enough, if you are fortunate, blessed enough to have that field that has been touched by the good seed, then you too carry a responsibility. This is what's bringing the whole point of what's coming on here, is that at one time we might have looked at the missionary as biblical idealism. We go because we are told to go. We go because we are called, which is still the most important thing. But in the practical side, it has gone beyond that, because even now we see that we reap what has been sown anywhere. We all reap. And in some cases, we are reaping the whirlwind because we refuse to sow. And so here we are.